Begin the current Daf Mesech Kesuvos Daf Yud. Begin on the bottom of Tezayin Beis, 2 lines up in the bottom of the Yomei, where the Gemara continues with a related teaching with a well-known Gemara, regarding different customs that were at weddings, because we had mentioned that one of the customs that we had by that of a Basula, because we had to know, which relates to the topic of our Mishnah, regarding who do we believe, if she was a Basula or a Almana, that they would do certain type of dances by the Basula, so that we continue with regarding the customs that they have by weddings, specifically regarding the Meraktim, the way they dance with Ne'akal. Today's Daf. Something we discussed in today's Daf, if let's say on the road there's a Kala and there's also a dead person, that we bypass the mess to cause the Kala, that we give greater precedence to the Kala. Although obviously there's nothing greater than learning Torah, but we will stop the learning of Torah for taking out someone to be buried and for bringing a Kala to the chuppah. We have the famous machlekes b'sham Mesil regarding Ketzim Merakim of Kala. How do we dance in front of the Kala? In other words, what do we say in regards to the beauty of the Kala? And various methods. The Gemara goes through rejoicing before the Kala, but some Tanoim and Amiram. Achilas Gimel Shon HaBechazaka, although this is the topic more of Baba Baster, but it comes up in today's Daf, regarding if someone buys a piece of property, so he has to have documentation to prove that it's his. But what happens? He can't hold on to the document forever. So if he already has consumed the produce for 3 years, that's a chazaka. We can presume that it's already his, which relates to macha shalim b'fanav hava macha, which is, so if this guy is squatting on his property, he has to protest to show that the fact that he's eating the produce doesn't show that's not because it's his. He's squatting on my property. And the halach is that even if it's not that's where the Gemara discusses this idea. If let's say someone's doing it not in front of the other person, is that going to be a valid macha to invalidate that person's chazaka? Depends where the location of the people who are doing macha is going to be. So we begin on Daf Tezayin Beis, 2 lines up at the bottom of the Yomei, where we begin with the famous brisa that everyone sings. Says the brisa, Keitzad meraktin lefnei hakala. How do we dance in front of the Kala? Like we said, because the Gemara previously mentioned from the signs of the Bryce had said, some of the signs of that she's a Basula is Raktu Lefaneha. We had said that was a sign, if there's witnesses that they danced in front of on the days of a wedding, that must be that she's a Basula, that she wasn't Almana. So on that the Bryce elaborates on, so how do they dance in front of the Kala? Which Rashi famously says, it's not about dancing. What do they say in front of her? That somehow is related to the dancing. So Beishami says, Kala Kamei, the bride as she is, which is according to her beauty and her chashivas. That's how they praise her. Which Tracy explains that Beishami holds if she has a blemish, be quiet, don't praise her, or praise her with something beautiful that she does have. Nice eyes, her hands if they're beautiful, but as she is. Basil says, no, Kala Noah, Vachasuda, a beautiful bride, and Chasuda. What does Chasuda mean? Rashi says like there's a thread of kindness that's drawn over her. So Chasuda is that the kindness is on her, it's like reflective. Which Taisa explains, Basil hold, no, you have to totally praise her. Why? Because when you mention something beautiful, well, what's with the rest? Obviously that, oh, nice eyes, what do you mean? Are you telling me that our cheeks and our this and that is not? So Basil says you can't do that. You can't say Kala Kamei Shehi. You have to say, wow, mom is beautiful, unbelievable. So Basil says to Basil, what do you mean? Let's say she was lame. Or blind. We tell her, Kala no v'chasuda. Wow, beautiful. Wow, she's mom is perfect. But Torah says, a pasuk in Shemais, midva sheket tirchok. From a false word, you should distance yourself. So I'm going to be Basil Bisham. Basil responds back to Bisham. Says, Lidavrechem, according to your opinion, Bisham, you're straight up. You tell it as it is. So Mishalakach Mekach Ram and Ashok. Someone buys a bad deal from the marketplace. You should chen be'enav, or you can end be'enav. Should you praise it in his eyes, or should you degrade it in his eyes? Have a aimer, listen up people, you should chen be'enav. Don't be the one straight up says, you bought that? For that price? It sounds like even Beishame agrees that of course you should praise and say, wow, such a nice purchase, nice white sneakers you got over there, right? For a few $100s that you bought, right? And now, is Taisus even explains, Rishami agrees, of course he should b'china be'enav, but they disagree because a chum should not have been mesaken to require someone to lie, because the Torah says midvar sheketirchas. Although Bisham agrees that if it happens to be someone bought something and it's taka, I can't believe he bought that, but say, oh yeah, taka, very nice, beautiful. But to make it takana that every kala you're going to say kala nava chasuda to lie, that Bisham didn't agree with. But says the Gemara, Mikan, says the Brisa from the words of Isil, that they say that you should praise the kala nava chasuda. The sages said the following teaching: La'olam te'daita shel adam. It should always be that the person's intentions, his thoughts, his opinions should always be mu'reves ha'mabriyos, should be mixed together with the people. Which Rashi paraphrases the pasuk and it says "Lasas le'ish v'ishker tzaynai," meaning to do for every single person like is that he wants. So although that you might see it and you might think that this is not something that was such a great thing, this is what he waited for, right? But yeah, as I said, every single person, this was his ratzon, obviously what he wanted, and you say as it is for that person. Now the Gemara continues, Ki Asad Abdimi Amor, when Abdimi came along, he said, Hachu Mishru Kame Kalasa B'Marava. This is how they used to sing in front of the bride in the Western Eretz Yisrael. Loi Kachol, she doesn't need any eye makeup. V'loi Shrak, she doesn't need any dye that reddens her face, meaning blush. V'loi Pirkus, she doesn't have to braid her hair, meaning this kala, she doesn't even have any makeup. She didn't even do her hair, and still Vayalas Chayin, still wow, look at her, it's in the morning time, she's by the shviga, and mamish, nothing on, and look how beautiful, how much favor she finds. Now, continuing regarding the songs they used to sing, so related, not regarding a kala, but ki samchu rabban Reb Zera. When the Rabbanan did smicha, gave smicha to Reb Zera to appoint him, ordinate him as a rabbi, so shortly hachi, they sang him the following song. Like chal, v'loy shrak, v'loy pirkus, mean the same words, that no makeup and no blush and no braiding, v'yalas chen, and he finds favor, means to say not that he was wearing makeup, but they're obviously referring to that same idea that he doesn't need any facades. No, there's no veneer by this rabbi. He's still a great person without all the show. And kisamchu rabban l'rabam l'rabasi, when the rabbis when they gave smicha to Rabban and Rabasi, they sang as follows: Kol mendain, all those that are just like these. We should ordain them to call them rabbi and to appoint them as judges, because these are great ones, Rabban and Rabasi. And we don't want to ordain for ourselves loimin sarmisen. It's from the word of misarsen, that they invert the halachas, the opposite of what their reasoning is. V'loimin sarmitin, which it's from the word of samartut, which means a rag. In other words, that they don't really explain very well their words. And some say loimin chamisen, which is from like the chamsa, it means they say only a fifth of the reasoning, or as actually the Aruch brings, that they only learn a fifth of the Masechta. So when the Rebbe decries we have to finish the Masechta, that we don't want from those that only learn a fifth of the Masechta. And V'loimin turmisen. The turmisen was actually usually spelled with a taf, not a tes, but it's a type of bean, which is referring to these rabbis that their laws are bitter and they're not sweet. Like the turmis bean, which is bitter, and you can't sweeten it only with great difficulty, as the Gemara says in Brachas, that you would cook it 7 times. So to the students to sit in front of such a rav, that they don't understand what he's saying unless with great effort, because he doesn't know how to answer the questions that are being asked of him. That's one interpretation of Rashi says it means anashim reikim, empty people. But those rabbis we don't want to ordain. We only want such people like Rabbi Basi. That's the song that they sang for him when they ordained them as rabbis. Continuing regarding leaders, Rebavo, when he would come from the Beis HaMedrash, the Beit Cases of the house of the Caesar, so Nafkun Am Hasa, the Beit Case La'ape, so the maidservants of the house of the Caesar would go out to greet him, and again, continuing on what type of songs they would sing, and they would sing like this. It sounds like one of these like Broadway play. Everyone's singing over here, but they would say Rabba Da'ame, the leader of his people, Umad Barana, and the leader de Umase of his people, Beitzina Dinahira, a candle of light, which is because his face would shine. Like the Gemara says, the Bolabasa of Mechesim and Aleph, that the beauty of Rabbi Vo was like that of Rabbi Yechanan, which was like a shine coming from him, as the Gemara explains over there. Brich masech l'shlam, that blessed is your coming in peace. Now going back to the rejoicing by the Chasim Akala, like we said, Ketzim Meraktim Lefnei Akala, some of Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, they said regarding Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, show you Neitel Bat Shel Hadas. He would take a branch of a myrtle, Merakid Lefnei Akala, and he would dance in front of the Kala. Va'oimen, he would say, so that's like what Rashi said, you see that the dancing had what they would say, and he would say, like Basil, Kala Noah B'chasuda, a beautiful and graceful Kala. Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, he would be Merakid Atlas. He would dance with 3 stalks of Hadassim, where he would throw one up and receive it, meaning this was the forerunner of all the jugglers who get their time in the limelight by the chasnas in the middle. So the great Rosh Shmuel bar Yitzchak would dance and juggle these Hadassim. Now Amr B'Zeir said, Kamach Savlan Saba, the elder, he's embarrassing us because he's degrading the honor of the Talmid Chachamim. What is it? He's dancing, he's juggling, what suddenly he's doing somersaults and everything, and this is Mitalang Gavasabud. This is what he's doing, he's embarrassing us. Now, Kinach Navshe, but when Rav Shmuel Yitzchak passed away, Ifsik Amuda Denura, there was a pillar of fire that separated Bein Didei, the Kuliyam, between him and the rest of the people. We have a tradition, that a pillar of fire does not separate. Ela ila chad badara is the famous terminology, chad badara, only for one in a generation, either tre badara or 2 in the generations, which means to say that he must have been a very great person. And Amr B'Zeir said, and there's 3 different versions of what he said, all different variations of the same word. Ahanyele shutise l'saba. Shutise from the word of shait, of a hadas, a branch of the hadas that he would dance with. That branch was what helped him, that because he danced in front of the Kala with that branch, that's why he had this schus of the pillar of fire separating, which Tais explains, how did they know that that's why he merited? So Tais is interesting that the amud, the pillar of the fire was in the shape of a branch of a hadas. And that's how they knew that that's obviously the reason why he merited this great schus, because he would dance and juggle these hadassim in front of the Kala. V'amrula, some say a slightly different version, the word is shutese l'saba, meaning he acted like a shaita. He did all these shtick, the juggling the fires and everything like that. So it's not the word shutise, but shuse l'saba. Or some say the third version is shitase l'saba. His shita that he held and his custom that this was appropriate. So again, 3 different variations of the same word. Either it's the branch, or his acting like a shaita, or his shita is what helped him that now he had such a great schus because of what he did at the chasna. Another Amayr of Acha, Marchivla, he actually went and he carried the Kala, a kasri on his shoulders. Umaraka, name was dancing. So Amalei Rabban, the rabbi said to him, Anan Hachi, what's us? Can we do the same thing? Can we get the Kala on our shoulder and dance with her? Which I guess maybe this is where it came the meaning of the chassan, to carry the chassan on the shoulder. Here they're carrying the Kala on the shoulders. So Amalei said to them, look, Idam Aleichu Kikshuva. If the Kala appears to you like a beam, which you're not thinking about her, then l'chai, all the more so. But if not, then not, and Minigam seems to be not, we don't carry the Kala on our shoulders, because obviously you have to be in a great level to consider a girl like a beam in that regard. Now, related discussion, although obviously it's forbidden to gaze at a woman, but you're allowed to gaze at the Kala all the 7 days of the Sheva Brachas. To endear her to her husband. Which Rashi says something very interesting. He says that when he sees that everybody's looking at her, then her beauty goes into his heart. Great insight, obviously, into psychology. What that actually means, that that enters into his heart. When he sees everybody gazing at her, he married her. He thought she was beauty, but no. When everyone's looking at her, it's like, oh, Taka goes into his heart, and he feels that. But the Gemara Paskins Allah is not like that. Don't be gazing at the Kala because she's all dressed up. That doesn't give you a head to be looking at her. When the Kala is going out from her father's household to the way they used to do it in the shtetl, would come out from the tata, they would say nine. So taking her from her father's house to the place where the chasna is going to be, and at the same time is the levaya. So you can pick a alta shtetl, they're coming out from the Kala's house, going to the base chasnas, and then coming, the mamoni, the alta vabel with her covering, and they're carrying the mess going out. And now there's throngs that are meeting each other, and they don't want to intermingle. So it says the Bryce Halach is mavir nes hames. So what you do is you redirect the levaya another way, milifnei kala, from in front of the bride. In other words, the bride keeps on going straight, and you divert. So we give precedence to the kala, and you divert the traffic of the levaya the other way. And milifnei melech Yisrael, and you divert the traffic of both the kala and the mess of this levaya. And there's a king of the Jewish people coming. He gets precedence, and you divert the two of them. Now, interestingly, but Amr Laval Agrippas HaMelech, they said regarding King Agrippas that Sha'avim Lefnei Kala, he actually diverted himself in front of a Kala. He let the Kala go straight. And the sages, they praised him. Says they praised him. Is that to say that he did appropriately? But Rashi says the Philamandam, even according to the one who says which the Machalik is in the first Kedushin, that Nasi, a leader. Not the king, the leader. Shemachal kavod that he honors, he pardons his honor. Kavod demachal, he could pardon his honor. But Melech, a king, shemachal kavod, if he pardons his honor, ain't kavod demachal, his honor is not forgiven. Because the Gemara said, the master says, explaining a pasuk in the bottom, says soyim tasum lecha melech. It has a redundant terminology. Place you shall surely place upon you a king, which the Jewish people are very forewarned that they should have a lot of placements of the honor of the king. In other words, that his oar should be on you, and therefore his covenant is not pardoned. And that's why it says more than one time the word Saim. So how could it be that he did appropriately? Which Tosfos points out, although he really wasn't a full-fledged king, as the Gemara explains in Seder of Memav, but Lamaisa, they treated him like the honor of a regular king. So how is it that it could have been something they praised that it was appropriate for him to be Meichel on his covenant? So the Gemara explains, no Prussian Zerachim Havi, that actually it was by a crossroads. So it wasn't recognizable that he redirected himself in front of the road, as if he needed to take that road, but he really didn't, so therefore it wasn't really a pagam, wasn't really a disgrace in his covenant, and therefore it wasn't a problem. He says, why can't you say for a mitzvah purpose is different, as the Gemara says over the Insaita, for a mitzvah purpose a king couldn't be meichel on his covenant. So that places, that's only, let's say, between the person and Hashem, but that's not the same thing that would be by a kala, and therefore the Gemara didn't answer that idea. I mean, you explained the reason for the halacha. So the Gemara continues turn up on the Brisa, continue on this halacha that we're talking about regarding lavaya and regarding a kala. So mevatlan tamid Torah, we nullify, we stop, we avoid the learning of Torah. But it's us a mess to take out a dead person. Ulachnas kala, interesting the words of taking out, taking in, but we take out the mess. Ulachnas kala, we bring in the kala. Which they said regarding Rabbi that he kept this halacha that he stopped the learning of Torah, like says the Meslach Kala, to take out a dead person and to bring in the kala for the chuppah. Now, the Medbrim, when we say this, is only kishein imo kol tzarka, that if the dead person doesn't have enough, as we're going to explain in a moment what that is, for the levaya. If there's enough people for the levaya, then you don't stop the learning of the Torah. Says the Gemara, how much is necessary for the levaya? So we have two opinions. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Ini B'Shmei Derab says his trace alpha gavre is 12,000 men, b'shita alpha shipure, and you have 6,000 blow the trumpets that announce that you should come for the honor. So that's maybe the forerun of the Ramkol. I was coming for the Hamsham God, right? You have to have those trumpets going out that people should know that there's going to be. Some say a slightly different version. Is Tleis Alpha Gabri is 12,000 men, Uminayu Shita Alpha Shipuri, meaning from the 12,000, 6,000 blow the trumpets, not 18,000, not 12 plus 6, but from the 12, 6 of them should be blowing the trumpets. That's one shot. Ulami says the second interpretation is going to Chaitzi Gabri. It's that you have to have, that you're going to have a partition of men, Me'avula, from the gate of the city, which they used to have their cemeteries out of the city gates. So it's like from the city gates, Vad Sichra, up until the grave, that we have enough men that have that whole from the city gates to the burial place, that's considered enough. Third interpretation of Sheshes, Vitam he says, Nitilasa, the taking of the Torah from the person, is Kinisinasa, is like the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. Why is it considered the taking? Because Rashi says when the person dies, so that's it, his learning stops. It's like taking the Torah away. So you have to take away the way you gave the Torah. Just like the giving of the Torah was with 600,000, so through the taking of the Torah requires 600,000 people. Now, says the Gemara, when do we say this? Laman de Kadi. For someone who learned Chumash, Vitani, and he learned Mishnayos, but he didn't ever yet teach to Talmidim. That's when we said this and that. Let's continue to Beis, Avlaman de Masni, but for someone who taught to others, Leslie Shiura, there is no measurement for how many people, there's no limit how many people need to come to that Levaya. Now, Rashi says, by default, we also hear that let's say someone that did not even learn Chumash or Mishnayos, then actually we're not Mavat Talmud Torah. If he has at least what's called Misaskin, he has those who are engaged enough just to bury him, as his burden shultas at Rabbi Chai, but although Tais says, but we're going to Mavat Malacha, you would be Mavat Malacha, but Mavat Torah, that you wouldn't be Mavat or Levaya of such a person that didn't even learn Chumash or Mishnayos. Now, the Mishnah had said that just this one clarification, we had mentioned this halach in the previous daf, that if the kala, one of the signs that she was a basula was if witnesses could say she went out with hinuma to the chuppah, she gets her ksuba 200. She says, my hinuma. So Surchan Ba'Papa Mashmei Deziri, he says it's tanura, it's oven shaped of the asa, of hadassim, of myrtles, meaning there was like a chuppah of hadassim that was like one big circle that they would do by the besulas. They wouldn't do that for the almanas. Or Rabbi Yochanan, he says a different shade, it's actually krisa, which it's a veil on her head that goes over her eyes, like Rashi is like we do in our place, which Rashi's times they already had the badekin, and sometimes it's a menamna bakalasa. The bride, she actually dozes off because it sees like the Hasidic badekin, where she's totally covered, not those see-through ones they do these days, and that since her eyes are covered, so she falls asleep, she dozes off. And that's what's called hinuma because of tenuma. Tenuma means to doze off, which it's for like the 20 minutes here, she has her face covered, and so she falls asleep. So that's, but upon them, the badekin, that the veil is a sign that she was a basula. That's what they would do by the chasnas of the basula. Now the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yochanan he says, b'chula etc. He says another raya that she was a basula was they used to give out roasted grains, and that was a sign that she was a basula. And if there were witnesses come along and say, grain by the chasna, we saw they give a roasted grain, that's going to be a raya that she could collect 200. Now tell me one of the brisa that Yehuda raya, meaning all those that we mentioned in the Mishnah are proofs in Judea that that's where they used to do these customs for basula. It says come up at Bavel, but in Bavel where they didn't have these minhagim that they had in Eretz Yisrael, what is going to be a siman that she was a basula? Some Rabbi says they're very interesting custom. They're dugi de mishcha adesha de rabban. The women would pour oil on the heads of the students and rub it in. That's what they would do by the chasna of a kala, which was a basula. So Amalei Rav Papa said to Abaya, mishcha de chafefusa, the aromatic oil that's prepared for shampooing. That you're telling me, kamamar, that's what the master is saying. What do you think, that these people have like scabs that they need to rub in oil? So Malay said to him, Yasma, orphan, meaning you're orphaned from the minhagim. Weisnish the minhagabasaini. Lo Abdullah imach dardugi mishcha arish derabban b'shas ma'asid. Your mother didn't do this of pouring the oil on the heads of the rabbis at the time of the chasna. Ki ha dahu mirabban, like it was by one of the rabbis, the Asikli Lebrei. He was engaged with his son to marry him off to a woman. Rabba Ula, which was from the family of Rabba Ula. Some say the other way, that it was Rabba Ula, that he was Asikli Lebrei, he was engaged with his son, Behum Rabban, that was from one of the families of the great Sededras, and Vedardig Mishcha Resh Rabban, and they poured oil on the head of the rabbis. They would pour the oil on the heads of the students. B'shas Ma'isa at the time of the story. So again, that was what the minig and bubble was when they had a chasna of a basula. Now the Gemara says, but amaltamai. What type of signs did they do for a widow to let them know that they married a widow? Meaning to say, we said by Yehuda, we said that they had this custom that they would have the open barrel of wine. But here in Bavel, what was the custom? Which Tais actually explains that the question is actually on Yehuda, that because they only had the giving out of the roasted grain. So they ask him, Amal Namai. But sometimes even without a chuppah, they used to give out roasted grains. It sounds like it was a snack that was like bamba, right? So you have to concern. Maybe some kids were giving out by the chuppah b'almana the chiluk kloyas. So how do you know in Yehuda that it was almana and not a besula? So Tani Rabbi Yosef, he says Amalta Lesla Kisne. No, they wouldn't have roasted grains, and that was the sign, which Shlomo explains. In other words, they were very careful not to give out roasted grains, but the chuppah almana. So they have a big sign that say, please don't bring in bamba to this chasna, because they only had these chiluk kloyas by the chasnas from the besula, and that was the sign. And if they made careful, they were careful not to have by the chasna of a beula of a almana. Now, going back to halacha of the Mishnah, which is really unrelated to our Mishnah and our theme of our Masechta, but we said in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua, which Rabbi Yeshua agrees, which we explained in the previous stop. What does it mean? He's agreeing, which is there was Rimliel, who they had this whole machlekes in the first parak regarding do we believe the woman with a migui. Rimliel says we believe her. Shua says we don't believe her. And the first half of the Mishnah, Rimliel was agreeing to Rabbi Yeshua that we don't believe her. She needs Eidim. And now the second half of the Mishnah, although it's unrelated, but it's related to the halachas of migui, that if, let's say, someone says to his friend that, oh, by the way, I want you to know, this field that I'm in was your father's. But I want you to know, I bought it from him, which we said in the Mishnah, Pesha also Pesha Hitta, that migui, he agrees, is strong enough to substantiate his claim because he could have been quiet, but he spoke up. So believe me, what I'm saying is true. There, Rabbi Shua is going to agree to Rabbi Gamliel. Now, the Gemara has the following question. Since the reasoning is like we explained in the previous daf of what's called Ein Shor Shachal Lefanecha, what literally means to say there's no slaughtered ox in front of us. There's no smoking gun over here. There's no evidence over here of anything, because no one was claiming anything from this guy, and he himself spoke up and said, "Hey, yeah, I want you to know it's your father." So Rabbi Shua agrees that we're gonna believe him. But says the Gemara the following question: But Velisni, why don't you say that Moed Rabbi Shua, that Rabbi Shua agrees? But someone says to his friend, "Look, this was your field, and I bought it from you." In other words, why did the Mishnah have to say a case that it was his father's versus his? Why did Pig, I want you to know that this field, shalavicha. Why do you have to say that? Why couldn't he say, this was your field? We have to bring in the Friede Gedoy. This is yours and I bought it from you. No one was claiming anything from him. This guy buys properties, he has no clue what's coming, what's going. He says, I want you to know, by the way, this was yours. Really? Yeah, it was a bundle we were doing in real estate in Dallas and whatever, and this and that. So why do you have to say your father? Why can't you say your field? Says no, I'll tell you why it's not going to work. From the Kabbalah Mishnah is safer, because our Mishnah wanted to teach two halves of this halacha. One when we believe him, and one when we don't believe him. What did the Sefer say? Sefer said, Im yesh eid mishishaloi, but we said, if, let's say, there was witnesses that it was the father's. And he says, but I bought it from him, then ein nemer. And that was very simply, why do we say the Mishnah is not believed? Because he didn't establish the Issa that it's shalaviv. So he can't remove the Issa by claiming l'kachtim. It's all based on a pesha or pesha hitter. I said it's your father's, I can say that I bought from him. But if we have Adam saying that it's the father's, he's not believed to say that he bought it from him. That's what the Mishnah says. Says the Gemara, if you would want to say the case that a guy's telling you that it was your field and I bought it from you, hey chidami, how would that work out? As the Gemara explains, why would this be problematic? Because if this quote-unquote buyer, the guy he's been on this property, if he already ate from the produce, already used the field for 3 years, the chamu masakin, whoever takes possession of a piece of property and he eats the produce for 3 years without anyone contesting it, he's believed to say he bought it and I lost my documentation, because a person is not required to hold on documentation for more than 3 years. So then the question is, if he's been on this property for 3 years, am I allowed him? Why don't we believe him? Why, if you told me that you have witnesses that it was that guy's, which again, don't get confused, we're trying to discuss when it's the case we're asking on. The guy's not his father's. We said the father in the Mishnah. We said the witnesses, the father's, this guy's not going to believe. Forget about that case for a second. We're asking, saying about it was your case, it was your field. So we're saying, if you're telling the guy it was your field, but I went and I bought it from you, what's the case talking about? If the guy's been on for 3 years already, so of course, even if he has witnesses that it was his, I'm going to be believed. because I was on it for 3 years. And that's called a chazaka. So why are you telling me, Yesh Eidim, that, oh, he's not going to believe? Why not? Why am I not going to believe? I was on it for 3 years already. And and if the guy didn't use it for 3 years already, of course you're not going to be believed. Meaning, what's the chiddush in the Mishnah saying, Im Yesh Eidim, that it's his? Will you not believe? Of course not believe. What would be the Havamina? What would I even say that for? I don't need a safe of a Mishnah to tell me that.
The Eidim are made that he owned it when?
There is this guy, that it's his.
Before 3 years?
Well, it never was. It was his. We don't know anything up until otherwise. It's a chazaka. It's his, right? Adam said, we know this was his. But now this guy's saying, I bought it from you. Okay, how long have you been using it? You're saying you bought it. You've been in more than 3 years? So I don't care that the guy's Adam. And if you were in here 3 years, so then obviously we're not going to believe you. Why should we believe you?
If the Adam were to say that they only know that 4 years ago he was the owner.
I understand, but he has a cheskes marikama. He has a chazaka. Now this new guy wants to say I bought it. Why would we think that we're going to believe him if he hasn't been there 3 years? Where's your show me your documents. Show me your documents.
3 years.
No. If he was there 3 years, then we'd say he would be believed, even if the guy's Adam. Even if that guy's Adam, we're going to believe him. That's what we're asking. We're saying that the halacha doesn't make sense. You said Yishlav Adam, he's not going to be believed. Why not? I've been there already 3 years, and I wasn't there 3 years. So what's the having me? Why would I even think that I even needed a saver to say that? So therefore, it doesn't make sense to say the case of telling a guy that it's your field and I bought it from you. But then the Gemara says, wait a second. If that's the case, then how does it work by the father too? As the Gemara explains. Same rationale. If this guy has been here already 3 years eating the produce, why don't we believe him? Why not? Even if the guy's Aiden that it was his father's, but I've been there already 3 years, I don't have to hold my documentation forever. If he didn't eat it for 3 years, so of course not going to believe. So why is it any different in the case of the father? Says, I'll explain to you why. Because it makes sense regarding the father you could have that you would need to tell me that, for example, where he did eat it years of chazaka, and still he's not going to be believed if there are Eidim. Why? Because you could tell me the following case. This guy, he ate the first 2 years, he ate the produce b'chai ha'av, when the father was alive. Then the father died, v'achas, and then he ate the 3rd year's produce b'chai b'noi, in front of the son. Now the son was a child and didn't contest. Now we need to let you know that since he was a child, that 3rd year is not going to be counted if there are Eidim. So although he did eat 3 years of chazaka, but if it was the father's, and he had 2 years by the father and 1 year by the son, that's not going to be considered as chazaka. And therefore, if the guy has Eidim, you're not going to believe. If it doesn't have Eidim, you have a pesha, also pesha. But if he has Eidim, yes, you're not going to believe in that case when you had 3 years.
Because you can't expect the cotton to be better.
Right, so that's what we're saying with the Rav Huna. Because Rav Huna says, you cannot take possession by the assets of a minor. So if you make a chazaka by the assets of a minor for 3 years, it's not a chazaka. Because the reason why the child's not protesting is because he's a child. And afila higdil, even if he subsequently becomes an adult at a later point in time, and this guy still is making a chazaka on it for many years, it's not a chazaka. Because since the beginning was when he was a minor, and he saw this guy taking possession, he didn't know when he becomes an adult that this was his father's until he hears from other people. And therefore, that's not going to be a valid chazaka. So then the Gemara says, okay, if that's the interpretation of the Mishnah, that's why we said a case of Shel Avim, because we're talking about that he had 2 years by the father and 1 year by the son. And although he had 3 years of chazaka, and that's why it's a chiddush to tell me that if there's Eidim, he's not going to be believed, because even though you're making chazaka, but it's not a good chazaka because of the child is 1 of the years. So if Rav Huna masnit aslash minan, so what's Rav Huna coming to tell me? A Mishnah? Since you tell me the only way of explaining the Mishnah is only with this case of 2 years by the father, 1 year by the child, because if not, we said the Mishnah doesn't make sense, it wouldn't be any chiddush. So what's Rav Huna coming to tell us? This is a Mishnah that everyone knows. Which Taisa says is actually Rav Huna, he made this teaching, was actually Rabbi's Dik from Rav Huna, but the Gemara is asking him Rabbi's Dik from Rav Huna. But Al Kaponim, why would we need to tell you this Amarag's teaching if Doch Gespart, and you see how far the Gemara is taking it, that if this is the only way of understanding a Mishnah, everybody knows this already. How could you could have learned this Mishnah if not have come into this Einfall that it has to be 2 years by the father and 1 year by the son? Because that's the only of understanding what would be the pshat, the Amiram schwitzed over Mishnah, and they knew what the Mishnah meant. So everyone knows this already. So what is Rav Huna teaching me? So the Gemara has two approaches. Either saying if you want, you could say Rav Huna to Yuka de Masnim come. Rav Huna is telling us the inference of the Mishnah. Now, because the Mishnah does not explicitly tell us that this is the case, Rav Huna is coming to tell us explicitly that you could learn out from the shpar, as it's called in Yiddish, from the inference of the Mishnah, that you must say that there is such a halacha that if you're being machzik lefnei hakatan, it's not going to be considered chazaka, because that's the only way of understanding the case of the Mishnah. Or if you want, you could say another approach, that afila higdal kamash malam. Rav Huna added on one thing that we don't necessarily see in the Mishnah, which was that not only is it going to be when he's a cotton, but even if he starts off as a cotton, because the Mishnah only you see 2 years in front of the father, 1 year in front of the son. You don't see anything necessarily more than that. Rav Huna is going to tell you, even if he started off as a minor, but then he became an adult, and now he's a teenager, and for all these years the guy's still eating it, it's not going to be considered chazaka, because since he always saw that guy in that field, and he was a minor, he didn't know anything then. So even when he becomes an adult, until he hears from others, say, by the way, this was your father's field. So my father's field? Who is this guy? I never knew. That's what Rav Huna is teaching us that we wouldn't have known from the Mishnah. But the Gemara continues with another question. V'lasanya b'didei. We should teach it regarding the guy himself. Meaning, he should have said that this field was yours, but I bought it from you. Like we said, he would be believed because of Pesha Asu Pesheta. You didn't even know this was your field. I'm letting you know, but I want you to know I bought it from you. If there's Eidim that it was that guy's field, he's not going to be believed. Now, and even if he ate the years of Chazaka on the field, why didn't you say the same thing you answered for the father's field? You could really say the same thing by the guy himself. How so? You could say it's talking about where there was 2 years that the guy was in town and you were eating from the property. You could have a third year not in front of him, where the guy ran away from town. And we're coming to let you know that year is not going to be effective. Really the same way you explained the Mishnah of the father. You explained to me the father who did 2 years in front of him and he died, and the third year is like shaloi b'fanav. It's not considered a valid chazaka, because chazaka is only showing that no one's contesting, but the minor not contesting is not a right. Here also the guy's out of town, so he's not contesting. That's also the same chiddush, same idea. So why do you have to say shalavicha? So why can't you say shalchaisa? And I ate 3 years, but we can say no, you're not believed because the third year I was out of town. So why can't you say that case? Says the Gemara, no, you can't say that, because Baruch Machmas Navi, this guy ran out of town for what reason? Either Baruch Machmas Nafashas, if he fled because of it for his life, of course he's not, the guy who's claiming it's his is not going to be believed, because the guy who fled, the fugitive, he couldn't protest, because if he would protest, they would find out where he is, and he was running for his life. So obviously he couldn't protest. And if he was running because of money, not that he was afraid from the government, it's just that people were chasing him, creditors running after him, then actually, he should have protested where he was, and actually, since he didn't protest, it would be a valid chazaka. So it wouldn't make sense. You're trying to tell me that, he's out of town. So, if he's out of town because for his life, then actually, he can't protest. So that would be obvious that the guy wouldn't be believed. So we wouldn't even have to tell you the halacha. And if he's running because of money, to the contrary, he should be able to be machzik. Why? Because you were out of town for monetary reasons, but you could have. You're not running for your life. You're not afraid. You're just in town. You have credit, so you're out in who knows where in Mexico. You find some haven that Cuba or whatever we are, but. So you should have protested. The fact that actually you didn't protest actually would make a chazaka. Why? Because the Gemara explains a very important halacha, which again comes up in Baba Basa. The Kaimlon, the rule is machosh lebefanav. If you protest not in front of the person, havi macha, it is going to be a valid protest. Which Taisa explains is something which is very important. In general, whenever we mention these halachas, as we'll see in length in Baba Basa, that we always talk about machosh lebefanav. Really, you should have said about the chazaka lebefanav. The Gemara keeps on pointing out, is it going to be a valid protest, even if you're very far away? Will that guy who's squatting hear about that you're protesting, saying, by the way, I want you to know, the fact that you're on it, don't think it's going to be a chazaka because I'm contesting. You're right. So hold on to your documentation because I'm going to take you to court one day. I don't have time. I'm not around. But I'm going to take you to court. Then the guy won't be a chazaka. Why are we talking about the mecha? Why are we talking about the chazaka? Why don't you say that the guy who's being machzik, he's squatting? It's not a chazaka because the guy who's the owner is somewhere in Zimbabwe. Why is that a raya? So Tais actually explains no. The primary rationale of these sugyas depend on the mecha because the chazaka actually the word does get out. Even if the guy's somewhere who knows the other end of the world, he ends up hearing about someone squatting his property. But even so, if the mecha would not carry, if let's say the guy protesting out in Australia would not carry to America, that would not allow it to be a chazaka. Why wouldn't allow it to be chazaka? Because even if the guy would be protesting, you wouldn't hear about it, so it wouldn't prove the fact that you didn't hear a protest. And that's why we keep on talking about the mecha part, not the chazaka part. That's just very important, as we'll see in Bava Basra. But be that as it may, the Gemara said to Nana, we learned the Mishnah Bava Basra, that a mecha, shalei b'fan, is a mecha, and therefore it was for monetary reasons that you fled, and that's why you ran away, then actually we would believe the guy's chazaka, even though you're out of town, because you should have protested from where you are. As we learned, the sholosh aratzis, there are 3 lands in Eretz Yisrael that are considered distinct one from the other regarding the halachas of l'chazaka, as if they're foreign lands. And therefore, if you're in one area and someone takes possession in his land in a different area, it's not going to be valid as a chazaka. What are these lands? Yehuda, the area of Judea, Beva Yarden, Transjordan, Vagalil, and the Galilee. So if someone was in Judea and someone took possession of his property in the Galilee, or Begalil, Bekarka was in the Galilee, and someone took possession of his property in Judea. In the chazaka, it's not considered chazaka until he's together with him in the same country, meaning either both in the Galilee or both are in Judea, even if they're in 2 different cities, but as long as in the same area. Now, but we asked on this in Baba Basra, what does the Tana hold? If he holds they're protesting not in front of the person, then what I mean, even in Judea and Galilee, you should still protest wherever you are. And the fact that you didn't protest would be considered chazaka because a mecha shel is mecha. And if he holds that a mecha, a protest, not in front of the person, for example, let's say he was in one city and he was protesting not in front of him, in front of 2 people in a different city, that lo yav mecha is not a protest, then that Yehuda be Yehuda, then even if you have 2 cities in Judea, nami should also not be chazaka because you can't protest not in front of the person. Well, he says, the truth is he holds that a mecha not in front of the person is considered as a valid mecha because of what's called chavra islam, which your friend has a friend, and therefore when you protest in front of people, the word's going to get out, and the one who's being machzik is going to hear about it. And therefore he's going to be able to be told that you should have been careful with your documentation because you heard that he's contesting. But it must need in the Mishnah that says that Yehudi Galil, one's in Yehudi, one's in Galil, it's not going to be considered as a valid chazaka. That's b'shas chayrim shama. That's at a time of when there's a chayrim, when there's a blockade, when there's a type of something stopping them, that they could say that, oh, I didn't hear about the mecha to watch my documents because there's an iron curtain that's separating between these 2 different countries. Now, Ma'ishna Yehuda v'Galil then why picking specifically Yehuda and the Galilee? If there's a chayrim, if there's, let's say the borders are closed in all the countries, so, and it's even in city to city, even 2 cities in the same country wouldn't work. So why picking Yehuda and the Galil? So on that the Gemara continues, that's because the Stam Yehuda v'Galil, that's because in general Yehuda and Galil is kashas chayrim dami, is in general like a time of chayrim, because they always had this, which they discuss exactly the parameters of that, but they always had that there was strict border control, that they weren't able to go from one to the next, and therefore that's why we picked that. But in general, the halacha would be that a mecha shel b'fanav would be a mecha, and therefore we said you cannot explain the case of sada shel chayisa. Why can't you say sada shel chayisa? It's because if he ran away because for to save his life, then of course we wouldn't believe the guy's being matzah, because the guy can't protest. They're going to find out his location and they get extradite him. Now, and if he ran away for monetary reasons, then no. What do you mean? We should believe the guy, because mecha shel b'fanav is a mecha, at least if it's not a time of chayr. And therefore, we should believe the guy's being matzah, even if there's eidim that it was at other persons, because he wasn't meicha, and mecha shel b'fanav is a mecha. So therefore, that's why the Gemara ultimately concludes and says we couldn't have said it that it was your field, and therefore we had to say that it was his father's field, and that's how he explained the halacha of the Mishnah. Rishon agrees that if there's no witnesses, peshel asa b'shetim, but if there are witnesses, he's not believed because there's no peshel asa b'shetim. I think to any time.